The kingdom of Dareth was silent under the gray sky. A cold wind blew through the high towers of the citadel, carrying the scent of iron and stone. Inside the great hall, shadows moved along the walls like silent watchers, their faces hidden behind masks of sorrow. Today the people mourned a king. Not just any king, the Alpha King, ruler of all northern lands, whose name struck fear and loyalty in the hearts of his enemies. His body lay in the center of the hall, draped in black silk and silver armor. The armor, once shining with the pride of victory, was now dulled and scratched, as if the battle had stripped not just his strength but his life itself. Candles flickered along the long hall, their flames dancing and casting strange shapes upon the walls. The priest chanted slowly, each word a solemn prayer, each step a ritual meant to honor the dead. The nobles, dressed in heavy cloaks, bowed their heads and whispered among themselves, their faces pale with grief and fear. But among the mourners, a single figure moved differently. She was young, small in size, yet her presence seemed to command the air around her. The Omega Girl, as she was known, was no ordinary visitor. Whispers followed her like shadows. Some feared her powers, others admired her courage, but all knew she was different. She had come to the citadel alone, walking steadily past guards and courtiers who tried to stop her. Her eyes were dark and her hands were steady, yet inside her chest a storm of worry and hope raged. The Omega Girl stopped before the great tomb. She studied the lid, carved with the symbols of kings and the faces of ancestors. Her fingers brushed lightly over the cold stone. The world felt smaller here, hushed as if even the walls were holding their breath. A voice in her mind whispered, urgent and insistent, "He is not gone. He is still here." The priest noticed her. "Step back, girl," one said sharply. "You do not belong here. The Alpha King is dead. His burial will proceed as it must." "I know he is not dead," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "I can feel his life. It clings to this world. I must see him." Murmurs spread through the hall. Nobles stiffened. Whispers grew into questions, and the high priest's face darkened. "This is blasphemy," he said, stepping forward. "No one interrupts the rites of death. You will face judgment for this." The Omega Girl did not flinch. She knelt by the tomb and placed both hands on the cold stone. A faint warmth pulsed beneath her fingers. Her heart raced. Her gift, the power that had always marked her as different, now guided her. She whispered a chant, one she had learned in secret from the old forests and hidden temples, a song that could call back life from the edges of death. Inside the tomb, the body of the Alpha King lay pale and still. The battle had left deep wounds, and his blood had soaked the earth of distant fields. His chest rose and fell only faintly, a rhythm almost too small to notice. But the Omega Girl felt it, as clear as if he were speaking to her through the stone. Her lips moved faster, chanting words older than the kingdom itself. A guard rushed toward her. "Stop this at once," he shouted. But when he reached the tomb, his eyes widened. The stone lid shivered, tiny cracks spreading across its surface. A faint sound like a whisper of wind trapped in stone escaped from within. He is alive," the Omega Girl whispered almost to herself. "He is not dead." The hall erupted into panic. The high priest screamed for the tomb to be closed, but the stone now resisted, quivering under the girl's hands. Nobles stepped back, fear and awe written across their faces. Some whispered that she had summoned a demon. Others feared the return of a cursed spirit. Yet she continued unwavering. Her eyes locked onto the faint rise and fall of the king's chest beneath the stone. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, a faint movement appeared. His fingers twitched. His hand, pale and cold, pressed lightly against the inside of the tomb. A soft groan, almost a sigh, echoed from within. The Omega Girl's heart leapt. "He is alive," she said again, louder this time. "I can save him, but he cannot do it alone." The high priest's face was a storm of anger and disbelief. "This is forbidden," he shouted. "You dare claim the Alpha King lives? Stop this madness at once!" But before anyone could act, the stone lid trembled violently and a deep rumble filled the hall. Dust fell from the ceiling and shadows danced wildly. The Alpha King's voice, weak and strained, echoed through the stone chamber. "Who calls me?" The hall went silent. Every eye turned to the tomb. The Omega Girl's hands did not move. Her chest heaved with relief and fear. "It is I," she said softly. "I have come to save you. You are not dead." Inside, the king's eyes flickered open. Faint light shone from them, the first sign of life after the darkness of death. He could not speak, not fully, but he understood. He had felt the pull of her power, the warmth against the cold of his near death. Somehow, against every rule of the world, she had found him, called him back. A gasp swept through the hall. The nobles and priests stared, frozen between fear and disbelief. The high priest's face turned red with rage. She has violated the sacred rites. The king is gone. He must not live. The Omega girl looked at him, her eyes firm and unwavering. No, she said. He must live, and I will not let you bury him alive. The king's hand, pale but moving, reached upward. It grazed the edge of the stone lid as if testing the world he had thought was gone. The warmth from his touch reached her, and her heart clenched. He was alive. Truly alive, yet fragile, broken between death and life. The hall seemed to hold its breath. Shadows flickered as if they too were waiting to see what would happen. The king's lips parted slightly, and though no words came yet, the message was clear. He had survived the impossible, and the Omega girl was the only one who could bring him back fully. But the dangers were already closing in. Guards began to move forward, drawn by the priest's orders. Nobles whispered about curses and blasphemy. Even the very air seemed to shiver with the weight of the forbidden magic she had called. The Omega girl pressed her hands harder against the stone. Do not close the lid, she warned. Do not end him yet. He is not dead. He is not gone. I will save him. The king groaned softly, a sound that shook the soul. It was weak, it was faint, but it was life itself. And in that moment, the Omega girl knew the truth. To save him, she would have to risk everything. Her standing in the kingdom, her life, perhaps even her heart, everything was now tied to the Alpha King's fragile survival. The priest's chants grew louder, threatening to drown her voice. The nobles' whispers turned to anger. The guards raised their weapons. But still, she knelt, her hands steady, her eyes locked on the faint rise of his chest. And then, as the final word of the ritual passed her lips, the stone trembled once more. Dust fell like rain. The king's eyes opened fully, revealing a spark of life that no one thought possible. The Omega girl's heart leapt. She had done it. He had not died. But as she whispered, "You are alive," a shadow moved in the corner of the hall. Silent, watching, waiting. Someone or something had noticed her power. And in that dark shape she sensed a new danger. The survival of the Alpha King would not go unchallenged. The lid of the tomb, still trembling under her hands, seemed to murmur its own warning. And in that moment the Omega girl knew one truth above all. The king was alive, but the world would never allow him to remain so without a fight. And so, in the heart of the silent tomb, surrounded by whispers, fear, and awe, she whispered again, "He is not dead, and I will not let him die." The moon hung high above the citadel, casting silver light across the cold stone walls. The wind whispered through the towers, carrying the echo of distant bells, as though the kingdom itself mourned and waited. Inside, the catacombs beneath the tomb, the Omega girl and the Alpha King crouched in shadows. The air was damp and smelled of earth and old stone, yet it felt alive, charged with a quiet tension. The Alpha King lay on a bed of cloths and furs the Omega girl had spread. His armor had been removed carefully, and his body, pale and fragile, showed the marks of wounds deep and cruel. He did not move much, and when he did it was slow, as if every breath cost effort. Yet his eyes, those fierce eyes that had commanded armies, now glimmered with confusion and faint recognition. "Where am I?" he whispered, his voice hoarse, barely rising above the echoing stone walls. "You are safe, my king," the Omega girl replied softly, her hands resting lightly on his chest. "You were thought dead, but I felt your life. I could not let them bury you while you still drew breath." His gaze sharpened. "You interfered?" His tone was not angry but wary, a mix of pride and disbelief. "The burial, the rites, they were meant to honor the dead." "You were not dead," she said firmly. "I can feel your heart, weak as it is. You are alive, and I will not let the world take you from this life." He tried to sit, but his body resisted. Every movement caused a shiver of pain to run through him. The Alpha King, mighty in battle and unyielding in command, now felt the vulnerability of a man caught between life and death. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a strange mixture of respect, suspicion, and curiosity. "You risked your life. For me?" he asked, his voice quiet. He could not understand why anyone would defy the high priest, the nobles, and even fate itself for him. "I could not ignore you," she said. "The life inside you is not your own to surrender yet. The curse clings to you, binding your spirit. If I do not act now, you will fade completely." A shadow fell over them as her words hung in the silence. The Alpha King's memory returned in fragments, visions of the battlefield, the last strike, of the enemy, the pain of falling, the darkness that followed. He shivered, and his chest rose slowly as if drawing air from some hidden place. The Omega girl knelt beside him. From the folds of her cloak, she produced a small bundle of herbs, stones, and carved symbols, tools of life-binding that only she could wield. "This ritual is dangerous," she explained. "It will draw upon my own life to stabilize yours. It is the only way to break the curse that keeps you between death and life." The king's brow furrowed. "Why would you give so much? Why risk yourself for a stranger?" She met his gaze. "You are no stranger. The world may not understand us, but life calls to life. I cannot let it end here, not for you, not for anyone." He studied her closely, sensing the strength beneath her quiet voice. He had ruled kingdoms, commanded armies, and faced death many times, yet he had never met courage like hers. For the first time he felt the pull of something beyond battle or duty, something quieter, deeper, and more dangerous to admit. Hope. The Omega girl began her work. She lit a small circle of candles around the king, chanting words older than the walls themselves, words that carried power in the vibrations of her voice. She placed her hands over the wounds, feeling the pulse of life hidden beneath them. Each heartbeat was a thread she could follow, a fragile string connecting the world of the living to the shadowed edge of death. The king winced as the ritual began to stir sensations he had not felt since the battle. Cold shadows pressed against him from unseen corners, the curse struggling to keep him trapped between life and death. He clenched his fists, trying to resist the pull of fear, but the Omega girl's presence steadied him. She whispered instructions, softly, guiding him through each moment as if they were breathing together. Hours passed in silence and whispers. Outside, the moon sank lower, and the first stars began to fade in the coming dawn. Inside the catacombs, time seemed to stretch and fold, the world outside forgotten. The king's body, once stiff and unyielding, began to respond to her touch. His breathing grew steadier, though weak, and his fingers twitched with renewed energy. "You are strong," he whispered, his voice almost a growl, though softened by awe. "Not in battle, but in will. You hold life itself in your hands, and I will not let it go," she said firmly. "Not until you are free of this curse, not until you are fully alive." The shadowed curse began to lash back. Dark tendrils seemed to swirl through the air, almost visible in the flickering candlelight. They brushed the edges of the catacombs like whispers of old pain, and for a moment the king's body convulsed. The Omega girl held him fast, chanting louder, drawing power from the earth, the air, and even the faint pulse of his own fading strength. "You will not take him," she hissed to the shadows. "He belongs to life, not to your darkness." The king opened his eyes fully, and for the first time since the battle, recognized her. He saw her courage, her devotion, and her power. And though he could not speak it yet, he felt a bond forming, a bond that would tie them together in ways neither fully understood. Minutes felt like hours. The shadow shrank, recoiling from the life she was pouring into him. Slowly, the king's strength returned. He sat up slightly, testing his body, still weak but moving with the control of a man who had been given a second chance. You have saved me," he said finally, his voice low and rough. I thought I was gone forever." "You almost were," she admitted, exhaustion lining her features. "But you are alive, and that is what matters." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers, a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty shining in his gaze. And now, what happens? The kingdom. They will not forgive this. They will not forgive you. I know, she said. I risked everything. I risked my life, but I could not let you die. Not when the choice was mine to make. For a long moment, silence hung between them. The king's hand, now stronger, rested lightly on her shoulder, a gesture of trust and acknowledgement. Outside the catacombs, the world moved, unaware of the miracle happening below the tomb. But inside, life and death had collided, and both of them felt the weight of what had been risked and what had been saved. The shadows of the curse were not gone. They lingered, restless and patient, waiting for a moment of weakness. And the court, the priests and the nobles would soon realize that their Alpha King had returned, unbroken, alive, and changed. The Omega girl pressed her hands on his chest once more, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "You are alive," she whispered, "and I will not leave you." The king, his eyes now fully awake, met her gaze. There was something unspoken there, a bond forged in danger, risk, and the fragile line between life and death. He nodded slowly, understanding the truth. He owed her everything, and he would not forget it. But even as relief and hope filled the room, a new danger stirred. Somewhere in the darkness of the catacombs, a faint whisper carried a warning. The living do not belong here. One life has returned, but the price will be claimed. The Omega. Girl and the Alpha King did not hear it, lost in their own fragile victory. Yet the shadows knew, and the world outside the tomb would soon remember that the Alpha King was alive, and that his survival had already begun to change everything. The night was not yet over. The ritual was not complete, and the Alpha King's fate and the Omega girls would soon demand a choice that neither of them could ignore. Cliffhanger. As the king finally sits upright, feeling the strength returning to his body, a distant echo from the tomb above reaches their ears, a sound of stone grinding, of seals breaking. Someone or something knows the king is alive, and the Omega girl knows that the danger is only beginning. The first rays of dawn crept through cracks in the stone walls of the catacombs, painting streaks of pale gold across the damp floors. The Alpha King, now sitting upright for the first time in days, felt the weight of his body again, the bones, the muscles, the breath of life he had almost lost. Pain lingered like a shadow, but with it came awareness. He was alive, saved by the hands of the Omega girl, whose quiet courage had defied death itself. "Your strength returns faster than I expected," the Omega girl said, adjusting the furs around him. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but firm. "The curse has weakened, but it is not gone. You cannot stay here forever." The king's gaze wandered over the flickering candlelight and the carved stone walls. I feel strange," he admitted. "Half of me wants to rise, to reclaim my throne. The other half fears what I have become." "You are still yourself," she said, "but the curse has left its mark. We must be careful. One wrong step and it could take everything from you. Life, strength, even your mind." He leaned back, feeling the fragility of his renewed body. Pride warred with the humbling truth of dependence. He, the Alpha King, who had led armies and commanded respect, now relied on this girl, this healer, this Omega girl, for his very survival. "Why do you help me?" he asked again, his voice quiet but insistent. "I do not even know your name, yet you risked your life for mine. Why?" Her eyes met his, steady and unwavering. "Because life is sacred," she said. "Because the world cannot end with you lost. And because someone must stand when fate is cruel. I could not ignore the life I felt in you." The king studied her, sensing more than words could say. There was courage here, yes, but also patience, compassion, and a strength of spirit he had rarely seen. And perhaps in that quiet strength there was a bond forming, invisible yet undeniable. A sudden sound snapped both of them from their thoughts, the distant echo of footsteps above. The catacomb seemed to vibrate with tension. "They are searching," the Omega girl said, her hand brushing lightly over his arm. "The priests, the guards, they will not forgive the king's return. We must move." The king rose carefully, testing his legs. Pain shot through him, sharp but fleeting. He looked at her, determination flashing in his eyes. Then we move. Show me the path. Together they climbed narrow staircases and twisted passages, deeper into the hidden catacombs. The air grew colder and shadows danced along the walls as if alive. The curse that had nearly claimed him still lingered, a subtle pressure pressing against their minds. It whispered warnings, threats, and doubt trying to break their resolve. "You feel it too," the king said, his voice low, almost reverent. "The darkness? It watches." "Yes," the Omega girl replied. "It waits for weakness, but it cannot take what is alive, not now, not while we are together." They reached a chamber where the air shimmered faintly with an unearthly light. The Omega girl knelt, producing small vials and herbs, laying them in a precise circle. "This is where we can stabilize you further," she explained. "It will take more strength than before. You must trust me completely." The king hesitated, the pride of a ruler fighting the necessity of surrender. Finally he nodded. "I trust you," he said, though the words felt strange on his tongue. "Lead me through it." She began the ritual again. Her voice rose in low, measured chants echoing off the stone walls. The candles flickered violently and shadows twisted as if alive. The king felt the curse lash against him, a cold pressure at the edges of his mind. Pain mixed with clarity, weakness with awakening. Yet the Omega girl's presence anchored him. Her hands moved over him, steadying, guiding, calling life back into his veins. "You are stronger than you know," she said softly. "Hold on. Focus on your life, not the shadow that clings to it. Feel your strength, your heart, your will. It is yours." The king's chest rose and fell more evenly now, breath deepening. He felt the pull of life returning, the darkness retreating, and with it, a strange bond between them, unspoken yet undeniable. They were tethered together, bound by the ritual, by risk, and by the fragile thread of hope. Hours passed, the ritual stretching on, testing both their endurance. Outside, the world stirred with morning light, yet below in the catacombs time seemed suspended. At last the king's body responded fully. He sat upright, feeling the strength return to his limbs, the clarity to his mind. His wounds, while still visible, no longer held the paralyzing power of the curse. You have done it," he said, awe and disbelief in his voice. I feel whole again." The Omega girl smiled faintly, exhaustion shadowing her face. "Almost," she said. "The curse is weaker, but it is not gone. You must stay vigilant. The world above will not forgive what we have done." The king's eyes darkened with thought. "The court? The nobles? The priests? They will demand my life, or yours," he said. "They will see this as a betrayal." "I know," she replied. "But your life is more important than their approval. And we cannot ignore the shadow that still watches. It will not leave willingly." He nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. He was alive, yes, but his survival had shifted the balance of power. Everything he had known, the kingdom, the throne, even his own strength, was now fragile, dependent on a girl who had defied death itself to save him. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the candlelight flickering, shadows stretching and twisting along the stone walls. Neither spoke, each lost in thought. The king was considering the consequences of his return. The Omega girl was preparing for the challenges ahead. Yet beneath it all, a quiet tension grew, a feeling neither could deny. They were connected now, life and survival intertwined, bound by danger, trust, and something more. Suddenly, a distant crash echoed through the tunnels above them. Dust fell from the ceiling and small stones rolled across the floor. The Alpha King rose immediately, muscles tensing despite the recent ritual. "They have found us," he said, his voice sharp with command. The Omega girl's eyes narrowed. "Not yet, but soon. We must move, or the priests and guards will descend upon us. And the curse. It will sense the chaos and grow stronger." They rose, moving carefully through hidden passages that twisted like the roots of a great tree. The king's movements were slow but purposeful. Each step tested his strength and endurance. The Omega girl guided him, her hand lightly on his arm, steadying him when the shadows threatened to overwhelm. As they emerged into a larger chamber, the king paused, gazing at the flickering light from an ancient altar. Strange symbols were carved into the walls, glowing faintly as if powered by the same energy that had kept him between life and death. This is the source of the curse," he said, realization dawning. "Yes," she said. "Here we can attempt to weaken it permanently, but it will not be easy. It will test both of us, mind, body, and spirit. He met her gaze, a flicker of determination in his eyes. Then we face it together, he said. I owe you that much. And more. She nodded, a quiet smile on her lips. Then we begin. As they prepared for the next phase of the ritual, the shadows in the catacombs stirred once more. The whisper of unseen forces echoed through the halls, chilling their bones. The Omega girl pressed a hand to the king's shoulder. The world will not forgive this. The darkness will not rest. But we must act now or everything is lost. The king tightened his jaw. Then we act. No matter the cost. And in the stillness of the ancient catacombs, two lives bound by fate, courage, and an unspoken connection stepped into the heart of danger. Cliffhanger. As the first symbols of the ritual glow around them, the ground trembles violently. A hidden trap within the catacombs awakens, threatening to collapse the chamber and separate them forever. The Omega girl looks at the king with wide eyes. Hold on. We cannot fail now. The sun was setting over the northern lands, casting long, blood-orange shadows across the citadel and the surrounding forests. The Alpha King and the Omega girl emerged from the catacombs, stepping carefully into a world that had already begun to turn against them. The kingdom above was alive with whispers. Rumors of the king's death had spread like wildfire, and the idea that he might still live was dangerous, almost impossible to believe. The king moved cautiously, testing his strength with each step. He was still recovering, but the life returned to him was no longer fragile. He could feel the pulse of power in his veins, tempered by the lingering curse that refused to release him entirely. Beside him, the Omega girl carried her supplies, herbs, and small charms meant to protect them. Her eyes scanned the forested path ahead, alert to any threat, mortal or supernatural. We cannot linger, she said, her voice quiet but firm. The high priest will not forgive this. The nobles will see you as a ghost or a threat. And the curse? It knows you are awake. It will hunt you. The king nodded, absorbing the weight of her words. Pride had once been his armor. Now caution became his shield. He glanced at her, noting the calm determination in her gaze. Then we move. Tell me where to go. She led him through winding paths of the forest where the trees grew thick and the sunlight barely touched the ground. Shadows shifted as if alive, and the wind carried whispers that teased at the edge of their awareness. The king felt the pull of the curse again, subtle but insistent. Each step required focus, each breath demanded resolve. As they walked, the king spoke softly, a question born of confusion and curiosity. I have led armies, ruled kingdoms, faced enemies without fear. Yet I am terrified now, not of death but of what might follow. How do you face this, Omega girl? She did not answer immediately. Her hand brushed a protective charm at her neck and she looked up at the sky. I do not fight without fear, she said finally. I do what must be done even when the cost is unknown. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the choice to move forward despite it. He studied her, and for the first time in days, a sense of respect and something softer, something he could not yet name, grew in his chest. She was small, unassuming in appearance, yet her spirit was vast, like the forests around them, strong enough to stand against death itself. Hours passed as they moved through the forest. The king's strength improved with each step, and the bond between him and the Omega girl deepened. Words were fewer now. Action spoke louder. She guided him past traps and dangerous terrain, always alert, always steady. He relied on her, and she led without complaint, as if his survival was her own responsibility. Finally, they arrived at the ruins of an ancient temple hidden deep within the forest. Moss-covered stones and cracked pillars stood as witnesses to time and forgotten magic. The air shimmered with energy, a place where the veil between life and death was thin. This is where the curse began, she said, her voice echoing slightly in the open ruins. If we can confront it here, perhaps we can weaken it permanently. But it will not be easy. The shadows will test you, and me. The king surveyed the ruins, his mind already calculating, already strategizing. Then we face it, he said. Together. They entered the temple, stepping carefully over broken stone floors. Strange symbols glowing faintly in the twilight lined the walls. The curse pulsed through the air, a subtle, insistent pressure pressing against their minds. The king felt it, a cold weight that threatened to sap his courage. But the Omega girl's hand on his arm steadied him. You must focus, she whispered. Feel the life in you. Do not let the shadows take hold. They feed on fear and doubt. Let them see your strength, your will." The king closed his eyes and drew a deep breath. He felt the pulse of life, the life she had saved, the life he had reclaimed, and he allowed it to flow through him. The shadows recoiled slightly, sensing that their prey was no longer weak. The Omega Girl began her ritual. Candles, herbs, and ancient stones formed a circle around them. She chanted in a language older than the kingdom itself, a song of life and defiance. The shadows surged, swirling around them like living smoke. The king's body shook as the curse pressed against him, testing his resolve. "Hold on," she cried, pressing her hands to his chest. "You are alive! You are stronger than this." The king felt her power, the energy of life that flowed from her, stabilizing him, strengthening him. His fear diminished, replaced by clarity. The shadows of the curse writhed and hissed, but they could not break the bond that had formed between them. Hours passed in the flickering light. The ritual pushed them both to their limits, yet slowly the curse began to weaken. The king's wounds, though still visible, no longer held the power to paralyze him. The shadows shrank, retreating into the corners of the temple, unable to confront the life that now burned within him. Finally, the Omega Girl stepped back, her hands trembling slightly from exhaustion. "It is done for now," she said. "The curse is weaker, but it will not be gone entirely. You must remain vigilant." The king rose fully, testing his limbs. Strength flowed through him once more, and his eyes shone with a clarity he had not known in days. He looked at her, gratitude and something more shining in his gaze. "You have saved me again," he said quietly. "I owe you more than life itself," she smiled faintly. "Do not speak of debts. You are alive. That is enough. But we must return to the citadel. The world above will not forgive your survival quietly, and the nobles, the priests, they will demand answers. And they may come with swords," he nodded. "Then we face them as we face all danger, together." As they prepared to leave the temple, a sound echoed from the forest outside, a distant drumbeat, heavy and deliberate. The Omega Girl froze. "They know," she whispered. "The kingdom has realized the king is alive. The priests and the nobles will come for us." The king's eyes darkened with determination. "Then let them come. We are ready." Together they stepped out of the temple ruins, the forest around them alive with the whispering wind and the faint shimmer of remaining shadows. The Omega Girl's hand brushed against the king's, a silent gesture of support and trust. He felt it, a quiet warmth that anchored him as they moved forward. The first signs of pursuit appeared, figures moving at the edges of the forest, cloaked in darkness, carrying weapons and symbols of authority. The Alpha King's return would not go unnoticed, and his survival had already set forces in motion that could change the kingdom forever. "Hold close," the Omega Girl said, leading him toward a hidden path she had discovered in her travels. "We cannot outrun them forever, but we can choose the battlefield." The king's gaze swept over the approaching danger, then back to her. "You have guided me through death itself," he said. "I will trust your path, even into the shadows." As night fell fully over the forest, the two moved with purpose, their bond growing stronger with each step. They were no longer merely survivor and savior. They were partners in a fight that would test their courage, their will, and their hearts. Yet the shadows were not done. Somewhere, deep in the forest, an unseen force watched them, patient and calculating. The return of the Alpha King had disrupted the balance, and the darkness would not forgive so easily. Cliffhanger. As the Alpha King and the Omega Girl move toward the citadel, the treetops above them shiver unnaturally. A dark figure emerges silently from the shadows, watching their every step, and whispers, "The king walks again, but he will not walk unchallenged." The citadel loomed ahead, its spires piercing the fading light of dusk. The Alpha King and the Omega Girl moved cautiously, aware that their return would ignite chaos among the nobles, priests, and soldiers alike. Word of the king's death had spread quickly, and now whispers of his survival would ripple through the kingdom like wildfire. The air itself seemed thick with expectation, anticipation, and danger. "Once we enter the city, there will be no hiding," the Omega Girl said, her eyes scanning the path. "They will see you alive, and not all will welcome it." The king nodded, his jaw firm, eyes focused. "I do not care who welcomes it. I will reclaim my place, but we must be smart. The curse, while it still lingers, and the court may use it against me." She pressed a hand to his arm. "We face it together. Every shadow, every doubt, every sword. The streets of the citadel were eerily quiet as they approached. Soldiers patrolled, and the banners of the kingdom flapped lazily in the evening breeze. The news of the king's death had left the city in mourning, yet the sight of him walking among them alive would spark fear, awe, and anger all at once. As they stepped into the main square, a hush fell. Citizens stared, some in disbelief, some in awe. Word traveled faster than even the king had expected. A noble shouted, "He lives! The king walks again!" From the towers above, the high priest and several senior nobles watched through tall windows. The priest's eyes were narrow slits of fury. "Impossible," he muttered. "The Alpha King, alive? This is an abomination. The curse. It was meant to bind him to death." The king stopped in the center of the square, his gaze sweeping over the faces of his people. He could feel the weight of their curiosity, their fear, and their hope. He raised a hand, signaling for silence. The crowd held its breath. "I am alive," he said, his voice steady and commanding despite his weakened state. "I have returned not by chance, but by courage and will. Those who sought to end me failed. The kingdom stands because life cannot be silenced by fear or shadow." Murmurs spread through the crowd, some cheering, some questioning, but all aware that the king had returned from what seemed impossible. The high priest descended the steps of the palace with a small entourage. His robe fluttered behind him, his staff clutched tightly. "King," he said, his voice a mixture of accusation and awe, "your return, it defies all we know. The curse. It should have claimed you." The king met the priest's gaze evenly. "I am here," he said. "The curse weakened me, yes, but life is stronger than fear, stronger than shadow, and stronger than your rituals. I owe my return to one who would not let death claim me." He gestured to the Omega girl, who stepped forward. The crowd gasped, sensing her importance. Though small and unassuming, she stood confidently beside the king, her eyes steady. "She saved me," the king said simply. "She defied death to keep me alive, and she will stand by me as I reclaim my throne." The high priest's lips pressed into a thin line. "And what of the curse that lingers? You walk among the living, but you are not fully free. The shadows that haunt you will return if you are not careful." "I am aware," the king replied. "But I have learned that courage, loyalty, and life itself can break chains that fear creates. I will not be bound again." A murmur ran through the nobles. Some looked fearful, others uneasy, yet all knew that the king's return had shifted the balance of power. The city, the court, and the priests would have to reconsider everything they thought they knew. Suddenly, a dark ripple spread across the plaza. Shadows moved unnaturally, creeping along walls and the ground as though alive. The king's chest tightened. The curse sensed him fully awake and defiant. He looked to the Omega girl. "It returns," he said quietly. She nodded, determination hardening her features. "We face it now, together." The shadows surged toward them, twisting into forms of fear and doubt, shapes from the king's past and memories of the battle that had nearly claimed him. He raised his hand, steadying himself. He could feel the pulse of life inside him, strengthened by the ritual and her courage. "Do not falter," she whispered, her hands glowing faintly with the remnants of her ritual. "Your life is stronger than this. Hold on to it." The king stepped forward, focusing on the bond between him and the Omega girl. Every heartbeat, every breath, every pulse of life became a shield against the darkness. The shadows lashed, twisting violently, yet they could not breach his resolve. The citizens and soldiers watched in awe as the king and the Omega girl faced the darkness, their forms illuminated by the light of courage, life, and defiance. The curse shrieked in fury, unable to claim him, unable to break the bond that held them both. The king raised his voice, commanding both life and courage. "I am alive, I am here, and you shall not claim me again." The shadows convulsed and shrank, retreating back into the corners of the square, unable to face the force of life and will now standing against them. The high priest's staff trembled in his hands. "Impossible," he whispered. The king turned to the Omega girl, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Without you, I would have been lost." You gave me life and strength." She smiled faintly, weary but unbowed. "We gave it together," she said, "and we will protect it together." The nobles, once confident in their plans and control, now looked at the king with a mixture of fear and respect. The citizens, witnessing the impossible, cheered in awe. The king's return had not only restored him to life, it had shifted the power, reminded the kingdom that courage and loyalty were greater than fear, and that life itself could defy darkness. But the battle was not yet over. The high priest, seeing his power challenged, raised his staff, chanting words that shook the air. "The curse is not gone. Life cannot overcome the shadow. He will fall." The king stepped forward, meeting the priest's gaze. "You underestimate the strength of life, of courage, and of loyalty," he said. "I am the Alpha King, returned by will and by the hands of one brave enough to defy death. You cannot undo that." The shadows flinched, the wind stilled, and silence fell across the square. Even the sun seemed to pause, dipping low as if watching the confrontation. Finally, the high priest's voice faltered. He lowered his staff, realizing that his power alone could not claim the king. The curse, once a force of absolute control, had been weakened by courage, life, and the bond between the Alpha King and the Omega Girl. The king turned to his people. "I am alive," he said once more, his voice strong and certain. "The kingdom endures because life cannot be silenced. Those who seek to harm it will face the consequences, and I will not be bound by fear or shadows again." The citizens erupted into cheers, and even the soldiers stood taller, proud and inspired. The nobles, shaken but wiser, began to recognize the strength that had returned to their ruler. The king looked at the Omega Girl, his eyes softening. "You saved me, risked everything for me. The kingdom owes you, and I owe you more than words can say." She shook her head, faintly smiling. "No debts, no thanks. You live, and that is enough." For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the king felt at peace. The curse had been challenged and weakened. Life had returned, stronger than ever, and the bond between him and the Omega Girl had been forged in fire, shadows, and courage. Yet even as the square celebrated, the king knew that vigilance must remain. Shadows lingered, and the high priest's power, though diminished, was not gone. The world was changed, but it was fragile, and he would face it all, alive, awake, and ready. Cliffhanger ending. The king and the Omega Girl stand together atop the steps of the palace, looking over the city. He turns to her and says quietly, "Whatever comes next, we face it together." From the highest tower, a dark figure watches, silently whispering, "The Alpha King lives, but the shadows never sleep."